Hi, and welcome back to another of the installments of the video overview of the chapters for the Immersive World Handbook. This is Chapter 4 that deals with authenticity, believability, and realism. In this chapter we'll consider what is authenticity and how it relates to effective immersive spaces, look at some ways to develop authenticity within a space, and to consider what role the human factor plays in creating authentic spaces. And I have to say that this is one of the most interesting chapters for me as a writer, because authenticity is one of those things, much like immersion and evocation, that really gets debated a lot. And people often say that authenticity is something that can be felt, but it's very hard to teach someone to create something authentic. For example, if one were doing sculpture or pottery, you couldn't necessarily know just by reading a book what the authentic way to approach that form of art would be. You'd presumably have to work with a master potter or sculptor and develop the skills, and then be able to create your own sense of an authentic sense of art. So in this chapter we're going to consider this important concept and come back to some issues that we talked about in the previous chapters. Specifically, I begin with those 4 ideas from Chapter 1, the big idea, the story, design, and experience, and we'll attach these notions to a specific exercise and set of examples as to why, in some cases, people buy the meaning that you create in your space, and why in other cases they're just not impressed and they walk away with a sense of a letdown over the space. And there's a particular table I have in Chapter 4. You'll note throughout the book I have quite a few tables and charts, and these are really meant to summarize things for you, and also as a designer give you an opportunity maybe to take a sticky note or two, mark the book, and come back to some of these ideas, and also really build on them. And I hope you'll have the opportunity to think through them and add your own concepts and examples from your own experiences. So this is a table that talks about why some people or guests believe the meanings that you've created for them, and why in other cases they don't. For example, if we have a story, in the belief column, why they believe, the story is detailed, involved, and gives guests the sense of a complete journey. In the non-belief column, as to why they wouldn't believe your story, the story lacks details and guests feel a sense of emptiness when they encounter it. And I go through a series of issues here. In addition to story, I talk about design, purpose, experience, and ideas. And really each one of these is intended to get you to think about those unique and often subjective qualities that allow you to create a meaning that people that are guests actually relate to and can understand, versus a space that lacks those meanings that they accept. I then bring back a concept from before, which is the idea of evocation. And this one's very important to me because it really suggests the idea that you could create a space that evokes qualities or associations that people have in spaces that frankly have been around for hundreds or thousands of years, in terms of some of the great historic landmarks across the world, or spots of nature that were not even created by human beings. So I use a particular Chinese proverb in this section on evocation. For me it's especially telling when I think about the most effective and authentic spaces that I've encountered in the consumer world. And this Chinese proverb says, "Tell me and I'll forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I'll understand." And the example that I connect this to is the rich tradition of Chautauqua performance. Chautauqua is something that my wife introduced me 2 years ago, and I've had the pleasure of going to quite a few of these events where the Chautauquans basically perform in character, in speech style, and also in terms of their knowledge of the history and the personality of the actors, famous characters, ranging from Thomas Jefferson and other individuals who have really been key political, artistic, or social figures in United States history. And I use the Chautauqua performance and also the Chinese proverb to really say, if you want to create a believable space, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take the involvement of all your material culture, your architecture. It's going to involve all the stuff we talked about in the previous chapter relative to performance and actors and service personnel who work in your space. I then go on to talk about 2 spaces where really the designers didn't get it right, and there are spaces that have been unsuccessful in different ways, and I give you examples of why these spaces didn't work. I then talk about evocation a little more in some specific examples of why certain places evoke memories in us or why they evoke certain feelings or emotions. Here I talk about history. I discuss the senses, which will be covered extensively in a future chapter. I talk about awe, a sense of belief, emotions, and a number of other ideas. And at this point, the chapter transitions into the concept of authenticity. And what I say in the chapter is that authenticity is one of those sort of I know it when I feel it attitudes. It's something you feel when you come to the space. It's something you experience. But if I asked you, well, could you detail to me why that space felt authentic? It probably wouldn't be as easy to capture that in words, because when authenticity happens, regardless of the space that it's happening in, it's a total experience. It's something that captivates you. It's something that draws you in. Again, it's something that evokes moods, associations, and feelings in you, the guest, to that space. I go on to talk about this, and I say the reason places evoke in us is that they're multi-sensory, they're multi-experiential, they're nuanced, they're detailed in terms of their design. The design involves the guest in the space. It's a space where story is really a key element and through which the design elements emerge. It's a space that people enjoy. It's a space that's fully connected to a world, whether that world is a fictional world, a world based on fictional characters, or whether it's completely made up in the minds of the designers of that space. And lastly, and importantly, it does not feel artificial, fake, or unreal. At that point, I launch into another one of these provocations, and I ask you, the reader, designer, to really think about what are some ways that you can make your space more authentic. And I'll ask you to reflect, as I often will in the text, on a design space from the past and ask yourself honestly, how can you make that more authentic? Particularly if you encountered situations with other designers or members of your team, or even guests who maybe remarked to you that there were some things that were lacking in terms of authenticity or believability. I then talk about examples of authentic design and perspective and authenticity, and end up with ideas of style clusters and some major concepts as to how style clusters affect the design of spaces today and also our senses of authenticity. At that point, I go into another one of these features that recurs throughout the chapters, and it's called Wouldn't You Know It? And in this particular example, I talk about the conference I mentioned in a previous video example of a conference in Freiburg in Breisgau in Europe, where I visited. And this was a conference that focused on bringing people together from the historical reconstruction camps, so folks who do Civil War reenactment, or like Mark Wallace from Chapter 3, folks who get involved in doing authentic performance in historic spaces for guests, and also brought together theme park individuals. And I talk about a particular moment in the conference where some people felt that there was a disconnect between the theme park camp and the historical reconstruction camp. And I'll just read you that brief section from the chapter. When the topic turned to authenticity, I had a sense that things would get heated. Indeed, many of the people involved in historical reconstruction felt that the people involved in theme parks were, quote, getting it wrong. I recall that one participant put up a picture of two knights reenacting a battle in front of a Pizza Hut restaurant. This turned into a, you know it, you see it, that's not real kind of argument. Wouldn't you know it, authenticity is a tricky thing. And what I'll do with these wouldn't you know it sections is to give you a short aside, some experience that I've encountered in my many years of experiences working with theme parks and theme spaces. The chapter ends up on the concept of culture and how you can use ideas of culture to make a space more believable. Everything from using symbols and allegory to mana, or a sense of power within your space, feelings, integration, and developing small stuff within that space. Quite excitingly, the chapter ends with two interviews of experts in the field. One is with Gordon Jones, and Gordon is the senior military historian and creator for the Atlanta History Center, also someone who's been extensively involved in Civil War reenactment, and he gives a really exciting interview in the chapter about how authenticity relates to the folks involved in an everyday basis in recreating Civil War experiences. The second interview is focused on how you could bring authenticity to life And the interview is with Kelly Gonzalez, who's the Associate Vice President of New Building Architectural Design for Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. And her interview is also quite interesting and focuses on some of the challenges that are faced on the cruise ship platform. And within a cruise ship, because everything is so small, compact, and also moving, obviously, she talks about some of the challenges of how authenticity is not as easy as it might be in terms of if you were designing it in a theme park or on land. So I think you'll find Chapter 4 to be especially stimulating as you get into the idea of authenticity. Thanks, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video installment.